And welcome to episode 6 of Creature Comforts, a spinoff series of the Straight Chilling Podcast. I'm your host, Soju, and on this show, we love to explore the fringes of horror and all things horror adjacent. Today, we are going to be talking about The Fifth Element from 1997. And I feel like just kind of naturally, sci-fi films and horror films are kind of like running this parallel path. I often see sci-fi films as just kind of naturally horror adjacent, even if there's not a lot of horror elements in them, just by their kind of like nature. But The Fifth Element is a very, very interesting film because I feel like this is not just your run-of-the-mill typical sci-fi film. This film is very wacky and crazy, and it has a lot of different flavors, a lot of action, a lot of comedy, and I do think some splashes of horror. And it's so crazy because it's so accessible for such a particular film with so many unique flavors kind of clashing together. I feel like a lot of people across the board, horror included, typically tend to enjoy this film. And so I really want to do this kind of deep dive exploration of it. But before I get too far into it, let's go ahead and meet our guest for this week. All right. And our guest this evening, the headmistress herself, all the way from Ghoulish University. Welcome, Logan. Hello, Logan.
Hi, Soju. What's up?
Not much. Thank you so much for joining me today. Logan, could you please tell everyone really quickly about Ghoulish University? You are the host of your very own podcast. Please tell us a little bit about it and where they can find you.
Yeah, so Ghoulish University right now is a podcast where we, me and two other guys, both named Nate, Naterade, and we call him Thon, but it's also Nate. We talk about, we watch episodes of Tales from the Crypt every single week, and then we get together and we talk about those. And eventually, like, we're going to run out of episodes of that show, and we're probably thinking about, like, covering other anthologies, after that. But right now, it's all Tales from the Crypt. So, yeah, we're on Instagram. We've got like Ghoulish Uni, Twitter. We're at Ghoulish University. And then right now we're only on Spotify and Apple. I should probably work on getting us on like all the podcasts, podcasting websites. But right now, just those two.
You're on the big one. Yeah, you're all on the one, the ones that matter. I listen on Spotify,
the ones that matter.
So that's the one. Yeah.
Spotify is the best streaming service.
Yeah, that's the one I mostly use. I didn't even listen to my own podcast until we were on Spotify. So, for real. So you guys are in season 3 now, right? Like the beginning of season 3 of Tales from the Crypt, right?
Yeah, we just did episode 3 of season 3. So we're, and obviously by the time this comes out, we'll be much farther.
Yeah.
But so yeah, we're getting through it really quickly. It kind of snuck up on me, but we've still got quite a bit to go. So yeah, we're chugging along.
How many seasons are there total?
There are 6.
So, okay. So you're all not even halfway through yet, and then are you thinking? So I remember, yeah, you mentioned you're going to do more horror anthologies. Are you thinking of sticking with just like show formats, or are you going to branch into like movie anthologies as well?
So that's a good question. We haven't fully kind of like talked about it. We've kind of just, like in theory, we could cover other things like Masters of Horror or I know there's like a bunch of other 90s anthology stuff, but I would like to do the occasional movie. I don't know. We wouldn't be able to do it all in one sitting, but I'd really love to do ABCs of Death.
Yeah.
1 and 2. Those have some really good shorts. We could do like 3 per episode or something like that. And what was the Mortuary Collection that came out on Shudder a couple years ago? Our test episode was on one of those segments. And so I think covering the whole movie would be a lot of fun. But our Halloween party that we did was on VHS too. So we have technically covered one anthology movie, but that was a 4-hour episode. So we'd have to figure out a way to either like split it up into multiple ones or something, because I can't edit another 4-hour episode.
No, yeah, that's tough. Only for spooky season. You do the special stuff for spooky season.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Well, there's a
Um,
ton of great stuff out there. I went on this crazy kick for a while where I was like getting into a lot of like anthology film, like horror films that I hadn't never seen. And there's like some really old ones that are really cool. There's a lot of stuff out there. So I think you guys will have plenty of work for quite a while. Even like kind of Cabinet of Curiosities that came out could even be approached in that same
yes.
way. Yeah. So I think there's
Our
plenty
friend
out there.
Hyderberg. Oh, sorry.
Oh no. Go ahead.
Our friend Hyderberg actually reached out to me after Cabinet of Curiosities came out, and he was like, "Yo, when y'all are done with Tales, this is like the perfect thing y'all can do too." And it's definitely something as I've watched some of them, I've thought the same thing. So yeah, I definitely would love to cover those.
Yeah, cool. Well, you guys are doing a really good job. I enjoy listening. I was listening just the other day, like getting some groceries. I was like cracking up in the aisles. I was like really enjoying it. So you guys are doing great. Make sure everyone who's watching and listening, check out Ghoulish University. And Logan, you also do a fantastic job hosting. So awesome stuff there. Yeah. So thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you so much. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I'm very excited for the opportunity. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, sure. So to go ahead and get into it, what are we actually talking about tonight? We are talking about The Fifth Element. And this is from 1997. It's an English language French science fiction action film, which that sounds confusing. Just wait till we start talking about this thing. Conceived and directed by Luc Besson, I think, starring Bruce Willis, Mila Jovovich, Gary Oldman, Chris Tucker. So to kick things off, before we drop our spoiler warning, Logan, would you recommend people check out this movie, and what does it mean to you?
I would absolutely recommend people check out this movie. Speaking of my mom not showing me the Fight Club, she did succeed in showing me this movie for the first time. She was the one who introduced me to like Bruce Willis. So like I've always had a soft spot for him. And I love this movie. I've been watching it since I was a very little kid. Granted, I was kind of talking to some of my friends earlier. I grew up watching the edited for TV version.
All right.
So last year was the first time we rewatched this movie together for the first time. And I saw some of the more explicit scenes and I was like, oh, this movie has boobs. So that was awesome. Honestly, I was like, oh, okay, it's more of an adult movie. But to me, I think like, I don't know, I grew up watching Disney princess movies where like it was basically told that all I need to aspire to is finding love.
Oh,
So
yeah.
this movie was the same thing of like, oh, the fifth element is love. Oh my God. So I love this movie just because I've always loved love stories. So it's yeah, big recommend from me.
Yeah, so I would also recommend people check this out. I think this is a very particular film. It's kind of defies a lot of logic in the realms of like what people can get into, who's into this film, how you make a film, how you approach making a film, like a lot of things. And it kind of still blows my mind that it's as accessible as it is, because as I was researching for this episode, I saw it on on this show. I want to like cover things that kind of fit into the fringes of horror, horror adjacent things. And there were tons of articles on like Dread Central and things like that on The Fifth Element, even though I feel like it's very accessible for families, for maybe even kids if it's edited, without some of like the nudity and stuff. And it kind of like defies just like any kind of box that you can put around it for like it's an action film, it's a sci-fi film, it's like horror adjacent or whatever. So I thought it'd be
Mm.
super interesting to talk about this when you actually picked it, and so I was really glad that you did. Um, I remember this, and because it defies so many different genres, I think when I first watched this was like back in the days of cable television. I feel like this one floated around so many different channels. Like it would be on Comedy Central or like the Sci-Fi Channel or like all different things. And I remember seeing it as a kid and even then being like confused, but also kind of fascinated with what this was and the style of it and everything. So I would recommend people check this out, even if you're not a horror fan. I think a lot of people can get into the sci-fi fans, action fans, a little bit of romance in here as well, as you mentioned. So yeah, I would recommend people check this out. All right, well, let's go ahead and drop the spoiler warning so we can get into the good stuff.
Spoiler warning.
All right, Miss Headmistress, I did give you some homework to do for this episode.
See?
We're gonna start off with the coulda, woulda, shoulda of this, and this is really, like I said, to kind of help guide a little bit of the discussion about is this like the fringes of horror, seeing this film like through the lens of like a horror adjacent thing. So the first question is, Logan, what subgenre of horror do you think you could put this film
in? I think whenever I was watching it this time around, I would probably say cosmic horror, I guess, given that like, you have aliens who like are kind of integrated among humans. They go from like different planets and are flying around in like a literal rocket spaceship, as they're on an airplane. So I guess that's kind of what I would put it into. I said action / cosmic horror, given that this is a very much an action film.
in? Yeah, I actually picked the same as well. And I think, you could put it into a couple different ones. Like if you wanted to specify something like even just sci-fi horror, like Event Horizon or Alien or something like that, I think you could. But I think thinking about the main threat of this film as like the Mr. Shadow or just a big ball of evil or whatever, it kind of makes me think of those like the realms of cosmic horror, which I put it like a little description for anyone who doesn't know like the specifics of cosmic horror. It's like the subgenre tends to see humanity as tiny in the grand scheme of things, and surrounding said humanity with a terrible unknown they never fully understand. These movies are packed full of scary things shrouded in mysteries the human mind can never begin to comprehend. So I think like the whole kind of big bad of this is like humanity is going to be destroyed by this kind of unforgiving evil, and it's just this kind of giant space ball that can't be stopped, really. It has no clear motivations. It can kind of talk. So
Yeah.
it kind of got like also too, like I was, thinking of things like Cthulhu and like things like that could just like destroy you like with no problem. So yeah, I agree that I also put it into cosmic horror, and I think it fits well in there from that kind of aspect. Okay. The next question is, what one element would you change in this film to make it more of a horror?
So it's really funny. You sent me that question. I thought you meant one of like the 5 elements at first. So I was over here trying to like think about changing the 5th one. I was like, what would the 5th one be to make this scarier? And I was like reading it out loud to Diego yesterday to kind of be like, can you help me with this one? And as soon as I read it, I was like, oh, he didn't mean one of the 5. He meant. So I guess the thing that I think would make this movie more of a horror film would be removing the comedy element from it. Because I feel like there are some very serious scenes in this movie that are undercut by, comedic timing, which I really like. I don't, that's not a complaint, but it definitely does take the seriousness out of some of the like scenes that are meant to kind of put more tension on what's going on. And so like, I feel like this film has quite a bit of levity. But I think removing the comedy element of this would also take away its charm. And I do think that if you were to change the comedy element, a lot of the aesthetic of the movie would have to be different too. But if that's like, I don't know. But so basically I think making it more horrific would be like taking out some of that comedy. long story short.
Yeah, because this movie is full of comedy, and there are horror comedies, and so in a lot of ways I agree with that. And like more specifically, I was saying that like you kind of mentioned, they add comedy in aspects where like there could be real threat or tension. So I actually said kind of like not necessarily taking out the element of comedy, but kind of ramping up or giving more importance to the threats or the sense of dread in this film. And so I was actually reading an article that I think this was the one that was on Dread Central, and they had a really good quote that kind of like made me think of this. But they were saying that when they are like dealing with Lilu, they take her very seriously and kind of like her concerns and her needs. But everything else in the film is always played to kind of like a comedic beat. So they said like darker events that occur around everyone else, events that could be harrowing or disturbing, as when Corbin Dallas is held up for money at his own front door by a man who is clearly incredibly high, are always meant to be viewed with a sense of humor. And like I kind of agree with that. Everything else, Ruby Rod later and yeah, everything I just like played with like a sense of comedy. And so yeah, I agree with that, like kind of ramping up that sense of dread and threat where it's already in there and just not adding the humor based beats at that timing pretty much. But yeah, okay, cool. And then one more. If people like this movie, what horror film should they check out?
Well, it's funny. You actually already mentioned it. I think I would recommend Event Horizon. Mainly because of the like aesthetics. I mean, it takes place in space. There's a lot more body horror in that movie than there would be in this movie. Granted, I do think that this movie has at least one scene that I would consider to be body horror. So I think I might recommend Event Horizon. It's like I said, it's a lot darker. There's definitely not really much comedy in that one at all for sure. But I don't know. It's one that I really like, and I think not enough people see.
Yeah, I think that's a really good recommendation because it's like from the same kind of era too. So the 90s. So it has a similar kind of like vibe of films from that era. But it takes a lot of the elements that this one is. And yeah, like you said, sucks the humor out, but it's got like the space element. It's got a little bit of like action and kind of like mystery things going on. And I love that film. That's a really good recommendation.
Wow.
It's brutal. So if you like, this is not like dip your toe in a horror, but Event Horizon is a banger and a good recommendation. I second that. That's a really good one. I had some recommendations, and my first one, I kind of got a couple because I like didn't. The first one is another one that's like not necessarily horror. It's like maybe horror adjacent, but I thought it kind of matched with the most elements of this film, and that was Starship Troopers. Have you ever seen that, Logan?
No, and I well, we're trying to. It's one that I know, like ever since Michael Ironside was in an episode of Tales from the Crypt, Thawne has very much been on like we need to have a Starship Troopers watch party. So
Yeah.
we want to all get together and watch it at some point, but we haven't been able to make it happen. So it's on my like immediate list.
It's a good one, and it's another one. It's like kind of a parody film in a way, but it's played pretty straight in some aspects. But it's got a lot of action. It's in space, but then it also has a lot of comedy beats as well. And so I really enjoy that film. It's been a while since I've seen it, but it kind of reminded me of the just overall tone and wackiness of this one. Another one that I have a hard time. So I created so many recommendations for this one because all of these are a little off. So this is a movie I haven't seen in a long time, and I didn't like it. But as I was watching The Fifth Element this time, for some reason this movie popped into my head, and so I thought I'd mention it. And it's Nightbreed. Have you ever seen Nightbreed?
I actually haven't even heard of it.
No, so this is oh, what's the dude who did like Hellraiser and stuff? Oh my God, I'm gonna lose all kind of like core credibility.
Yeah.
But I'll look it up as I'm like talking. But so the thing that reminded me of this is kind of like the way that the aliens are portrayed in this, where they're really kind of goofy looking and they almost look like they look like Muppets almost, that kind of aspect. Uh,
Morgan.
yeah, like Clive Barker. Oh my God, Clive Barker.
Ah.
Is did Nightbreed. So this is from 1990, and it's kind of got the same like like the weirdness of this movie is what reminded me of Nightbreed and kind of like the style of like the aliens and stuff. But Nightbreed is like completely like fantasy. So if you took all the sci-fi aspects in this and put it into like this fantasy realm, you'd kind of get Nightbreed. I didn't like it, but I thought some people might dig on that to kind of like check that out for a horror recommendation. Yeah. And then some like Cronenberg films. I feel like Cronenberg kind of fits this kind of realm as well. He's always got some weird sci-fi stuff going on and wacky effects and stuff. So if you dig on this one, maybe check out some Cronenberg. But okay, that's good for the recommendations. All right, cool. Well, let's hop in. We can get out of the horror realm specifically, and we can hop into like just how wild and wacky this movie is. I wanted to start off with one quote and then start to kind of get your thoughts on this movie. Kind of like phasing us out of horror, but still kind of keeping it a little serious, I guess. There are a couple quotes at the very end of this movie that I think drive home some underlying themes that are like going on throughout, but that don't really come together until the end of this film. And the quotes are everything you create is used to destroy. Lilu says that, and then Bruce Willis says it's called human nature. And then another quote was, "What's the use of saving life when you see what you do with it?" And I think that those are very powerful lines, especially coming from Lilu, who through this movie is she's very capable. She like handles her shit really well, but she's also very cheery and like chipper and kind of naive in a way. And those like kind of sadder, more somber or serious quotes from her towards the end of like this is what she's realized on her journey are like it kind of hard for me this time. What do you think about her perception there?
Um, well, that scene where she like types war into her computer and she like learns what all of it was, that was very much something that I like identified with as like a child. I'd come home and watch the news and just like start fucking crying. So like I totally get what she was saying with like everything you use is to like everything you create is like used to destroy. Because that's sometimes that honestly is what it feels like is going on around all of us. But it because you can also see how hard that affects her because after she like has that after she watches that she doesn't really want to save the world as much because she's got to like what is there to save.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's kind of like we were mentioning before with the sense of humor and like the lack of dread throughout this movie, there's a lot of things that seem like they should be really depressing and the characters don't treat it as such. And I think in that kind of way, it's a reflection on society. Like when we look at this world from like, oh, it's in the future and stuff. But, there's like pollution everywhere to the fact where they can like dive, to hide from the police, like under the pollution, like hiding in the kind of like slums of this giant city and seeing like where Corbin lives in this like tiny little apartment where his bed has to like fold in. And that's just like daily life. Where he's held up at gunpoint, at his door, and he just shrugs it off like, "Oh, just another day."
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I feel like that sometimes, just going through daily life, like you said, you see the news and these bad things happen, and in order to keep your kind of mental sanity, you just have to kind of shrug it off and most of the time like go about your daily life like just to kind of survive like mentally.
Yeah, I've had a few nights these past few weeks where I just like lay in bed and I'm like, holy shit, like mass shootings are a thing, and there's multiple mass shootings in this movie. I point out in my notes. I'm always like, here's mass shooting number two in this
Yeah.
movie. So it's to kind of like tie that in almost. It's like you see them on the news every single day, and you're like, oh my fucking god! Like, no, sorry, I need to stop with the cursing so much. But
Okay.
the the you just like I don't know. You just see even like because I was talking about back in like 2004, which I'm sure like the whole world was burning and ending at that point too. It always feels like it's ending. But it feels like it always just gets so much worse. You're like, how it can't get any worse, right? And then somehow it just keeps getting worse.
Yeah. And it's like interesting too, because like she, I guess from her approach in this film, she's supposed to be this kind of higher being. And this is, I guess it's a little unclear, because she's 3D printed from like a strand of DNA that survives this spaceship crash. And so it's interesting because I don't know if she was like a woman before the crash or if they're like kind of putting her in a human body. I was never really clear about that. I don't know if there's like a clear answer, but it almost seems like she's trying to become human because she's learning a bunch of things, learning language and stuff like that. And to see her kind of attitude change from this like very joyful type of like bubbly personality and just kind of like declines further and further and further each time. It's like, yeah, that's kind of like the progression of life in some way. Just super sad.
Yeah, because I mean, she basically starts out as a fish out of water who is, you can almost say she has like the innocence of a child until she learns, she like learns what like horrible things are and what happens. Um, so like it's just she matures fast, but darn it, I had a train of thought that I just lost. But yeah, I know what you were saying about kind of. Sorry.
No, yeah, it's okay. Well, so like to go off that, because like you said, like a childlike personality. So I think it's interesting to see in this movie, like we get this kind of like introduction of this kind of like weird religious thing where these aliens show up and stuff like that. And even in that, one of them is kind of accidentally killed through the folly of man, through violence.
Mhm.
But then it kind of throws us in and it's like, there's this destruction. Mankind is going to be destroyed. And through the rest of the film, you kind of explore different, like how different avenues react to that. So for instance, we have like a religious man. How does religion kind of react to the end of the world coming upon you? You have like the military, through the president and like these generals and stuff like that. You have like Zorg, who kind of to me represents like the capitalist nature. How do you kind of like capitalize on this, or what's your approach like through capitalism? And then even kind of like the mercenaries, like the kind of zealots who like feel like they're mercenaries, but they have this kind of like this like goal or whatever of like conquering and stuff. And then you have like the everyday man of like, Corbin Dallas and stuff like that. And each one like kind of has this different approach. And the movie kind of treats it as like infuses that horror aspect in it. But you can see like everybody just kind of runs around with like their like chickens with their heads cut off, like everybody's disconnected. Nobody really has any like roots in themselves. Everything is like chaotic. And I think it's interesting to see each one of these approaches to essentially like the end of the world. Yeah. Did you get anything from that?
Sometimes it felt like there were too many bad guys. I will say, because and like all of them are working for the big bad, the evil. Because there's various points where you've got the what were those aliens called, the Mangalores, I think.
Yes, the bad ones are called the Mangalores. Yeah.
And then
The
you have
Mang.
Zorg.
Oh, Lord.
The Mangs.
If a doll just works in. Yeah. Yeah. Then you have Zorg.
They
Yeah.
knew. Who I loved the character of Zorg. I thought he was like freaking hilarious. The like Southern queer coded bad guy who he's very charismatic. He was awesome. I do think like semi off topic. If they were to do a reboot of this movie, I think that Walton Goggins would have to play him because
Oh, that's a good call.
I kept thinking about him throughout this whole movie. I was like, damn, I just want to see him play this guy. Like, that's the only reason I would support a reboot.
That's a really good call. Yeah.
But then, like, and especially like we have the scene where they're going into the airport, which is all played very comedically. Of there's like 4 different guys trying to be Corbin Dallas. So you have David and Lilu who like almost get away with it, and then you have the Mangalores who can't like hold it together, and then you have the other guy who unfortunately doesn't survive that failure.
Yeah.
So like that was a point where I was kind of like, damn, there's so many bad guys. And at first, like as you were kind of talking at the beginning of, you know, like the overall bad guy, I was like, I had complaints because I was like, I feel like we don't learn enough about him about this entity. But I guess like whenever you were talking about it, one of the things that would kind of make this more horrific is the fact that like we don't really know the motive of, you know, this big bad. So that kind of makes it scarier because we can't, you know, like, I don't know, like the less you know, the scarier it is because then your imagination's with running wild.
And actually to go off that, so I made this note that actually that was one of the most kind of like horror driven moments to me in this film is at the very beginning where there's this ship and there's this kind of general on it, this military guy, and he's like totally arrogant, totally cocky about Mr. President, we're going to take care of this. And he's like going to destroy it. And then the priest is like, no, get them out of there. And then the guy, once he realizes that he's like done, and that the like ball is coming like to destroy them or whatever, he sells that so well. I will say that dude sold that like kind of horror and terror. And that's kind of like that's kind of what I wanted. I don't necessarily need to know more personally. I don't need to know more about it, but I wish that there was more of just that element of it, of like the terror, the destruction. And in that, I kind of agree because then we go to the Mangalores where they destroy the other ship and then they seem like the threat, but they're so goofy looking that it's like, I want the pure evil, you know?
Yeah. Well, and especially like they're like also, I call them like the stormtroopers of this movie because they're also just like really bad at everything. Like the only thing that they really succeed in throughout this movie is destroying that first ship. And then every single other time they're mainly kind of just used as like, you know, the butt of the joke. Like, oh, they're so big and hunky and like stupid. Like, oh, they can't fight without their leader. So he just like walks in and takes out the guy and suddenly the Mangalores are like, well, shit, what the fuck are we supposed to do now?
Yeah, they kind of like, unfortunately, fit into the action element of this where you need this almost kind of like faceless enemy that you can destroy hundreds of so that there's action scenes, you know. But you're right, a lot of the times they're just kind of played up as kind of like the butt of the joke and stuff like that. And so them as a villain really does take any kind of like real tension out of it. So yeah, I agree. I definitely agree with you on that aspect. And an interesting point, this was kind of like some trivia I saw, but this is like one of the few movies where like the hero of Corbin Dallas and Zorg, Gary Oldman, they never meet. They never have an interaction together. Never.
And that's the thing too, that kind of like, I feel like Zorg was underutilized. Like his end kind of just, you see him like he goes, he has his little card and he slides it and stops the ball. And then the Mangalores are like, no, that's not honorable. And then they have their own secret bomb.
Yeah.
Now I feel like we were robbed of a Corbin and Zorg like showdown.
Yeah. They don't even
Man,
like
now I'm
have any
disappointed.
dialogue or anything. They don't interact in the movie at all. It's crazy.
That is crazy. I didn't even realize that. And
Yeah.
dang. Because
Yeah.
like the big show, the big boss showdown. And that's another reason why I say like this movie has too many bad guys. Like I don't think necessarily that it's like a huge knock on it, but it just feels like a little convoluted. And I think that also kind of, I don't know, that just somewhat took away from it for me. But man, now I'm so disappointed we didn't get that showdown.
Yeah. It's a pretty bold choice. And so like kind of going off that of like choices of this film, this movie is wild. Just in almost every aspect, it's wild. I took this note that I said it's like wonderfully absurd because I almost just
Yeah.
can't. This is like the look into like this wild creative mind. And I can't believe that this man got this movie made, and good on him. Because even as a child, I mentioned before, I was just always so kind of mesmerized, but also confused about just everything that's in this movie. Because it feels like everything is in this movie.
Yeah.
But it's put together pretty well. And like, I don't know. What do you think? What do you think the kind of mass appeal of this movie is? Like, even for you, like, what is like the kind of appealing aspects of
Um, that's a really good question. And I was also gonna say, like, I think that, like, obviously we haven't gotten to, I think one of the most appealing parts of this movie is Chris Tucker and his whole deal. He steals the show, in my opinion. Like the whole movie, he's the star of the show. And he brings that energy. And the scene in the opera house where they walk in, and he's like, but who cares? And then he's like pointing out all these different people. He's like, we got ministers over there, more like sinisters. And then there's like that Baby Ray character who's also happens to be deaf, who dresses like a Victorian era guy. Like just the absurd, like you were saying, the absurdity. I think that whenever I think about this movie, I think about that. And then I think about the scene following directly after the singing, whenever Bruce Willis is just like being a total badass, going like, full-fledged action hero. He's just shooting people down, like the negotiation where he walks in and just shoots that Mangalore in the head. That's
Yeah.
like one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie, because he's like, we're going to chit chat or whatever. And then Bruce Willis is like, nah, pow.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely. I'm glad that you brought up Chris Tucker's character, Ruby Rod. I also agree. Ruby Rod steals the show. My favorite character by far, and something that you kind of mentioned a little bit before with Gary Oldman, Zorg's character, is one of the things that I even recognize as a younger kid, but even more focused now, is the kind of androgynous nature of a lot of this film. And I'm a big Prince fan. I really love Prince. And I definitely feel like that was an inspiration for the Ruby Rod character, because I love how like androgynous he is. He's wearing this like these crazy get up outfits, but then he's also like smooth and seductive. And like I love the little one moment where he like goes and he's like whispering to this like woman's ear, and she's like, so that she kills me. I love it. And Chris, yeah, absolutely. He's got some like gold moments, and it's crazy. Another wild decision about this movie. Ruby Rod, I think a lot of people like love Ruby Rod. He doesn't come into this movie until an hour and 10 minutes in. It's crazy.
It feels like you're just dropping all kinds of weird trivia on me.
Yeah.
I feel like he's at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
Like basically everything, and I will say that's one thing, like everything leading up to. Also, I didn't realize this was a 2-hour movie until I was like this weekend whenever I went to go rent it. I was like, this movie's 2 hours. I had no idea. And that makes sense, like you saying that, because everything leading up to it, I guess, just feels a lot shorter than it actually is. Because it really feels like you spend most of this movie on the cruise of the hotel thing. But really, I guess that's not as much as I thought it was.
Yeah, it's really like the second half, kind of not even like the full second half, because then they also spend some time like in the pyramid at the end, but Ruby Rod's there at least. But yeah, it doesn't come until an hour and 10. And but anytime he's on screen, he dominates. And that was
Um,
kind of why I wanted where I was saying about the humor too, because I feel like Chris Tucker brings the humor. He kills it in every aspect. And they should have put the humor there. Like Chris Tucker is going to be the humor. He's going to carry like 90% of it. But they kept that tone throughout, which maybe makes it more balanced. But I feel like they could have trusted Tucker more with like more that way, because I think he absolutely dominates. So there's another scene where he's I love it when he's got the gun to the thing's head and like he's just shaking so much, and then he accidentally like fires. I'm sorry, my man. I'm sorry. He's like, you think he's gonna be okay? That shit kills
I put
me.
a note. I put a note where I was like, "Do you think he's gonna be okay?" And I put no. I
Yeah.
that was really funny. Also, I did just want to give a shout out to President Debo. We got two actors from Friday in here. Do you know Friday?
Yeah, absolutely.
How could you not? So
Yeah.
I love President Debo, but I feel like him in his control room full of people, I feel like that also helps to add to the comedy aspect. That's just a little side note. But yeah, Chris Tucker like nails it. I love his clothing, and like you said, like how it's got more of like an androgynous style to it. And like this movie, like I don't think it's progressive, but also like sometimes it kind of feels like it to me, and I'm kind of like, oh wow, like you said, like how did this movie come out in 1997? That's like I don't know. It doesn't feel like it should have, but I'm very glad that it did.
Yeah, and that's why I kind of like wanted to reference Prince, because I feel like you got a lot more of that stuff going on in the 80s, but by the time this movie came out in 97, that was not a prominent feature in like music or culture at the time. And so to have this movie that's like so action based, and Bruce Willis is a huge action star. And he really I took a note to where like he does a good job, but they also like he doesn't have a lot of like standout moments to me. Like there weren't a whole lot of like lines I was copying down that he says or anything. He just is like the middleman, like get shit done, the action star, and he does good with that. But to have these elements in Zorg and in Ruby Rod and stuff, and even, the kind of, I don't know, progressive, but like the nature of having Lilu like kick so much ass. She's such a
Yeah.
badass to me. And I loved her dynamic in this film as well. Her personality, the way she just like steps in, takes care of business. I really like that aspect too.
Yeah, and I really liked how, kind of going back to this question you asked me earlier that I like lost my train of thought on. Because I think you were talking about like when she was being 3D printed and like what, because they keep referencing him whenever they have, just in its alien form. They're like, I can't wait to meet him, and then all of a sudden it turns out it's a woman. That was
Mhm.
awesome. I
Yeah.
loved that. And then kind of like going back into your question here. Yeah, I thought it was really cool. I like that they had a good way of explaining how she was able to learn English and martial arts and like such a quick, matter to where we could have that like awesome fight scene that she has with all those Mangalores. Um, and then not a fight scene with Zorg, but whenever he's trying to like shoot her out from the vents. Um, confrontation, I guess, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I like her as a character. I feel like everybody else like represented something like very interesting and in some ways maybe progressive, but not really Bruce Willis. But at the same time, he's just kind of like the rock, the kind of foundation that just kind of he could be anything, I guess.
Yeah, Bruce Willis. I don't know if it's just because of like how he looks, because I know he's old now, but I know he wasn't old then. But sometimes I feel like he may have been a little too old for this role. I don't know. At least I felt that on this most recent rewatch, I was kind of like, oh, but I don't know. That may just be me. But yeah, I guess that's something that like growing up, whenever I think about The Fifth Element, Bruce Willis was always the first thing that came to mind. But like on these most recent rewatches, I'm over here like talking about all these other characters that I'm kind of like Bruce Willis just kind of is there.
Yeah, I agree.
He
He
has a
had like
he
the
has
least amount of notes to me. Yeah.
he has a couple of little one-liners, but he's not really even there. And even Ruby's like complaining to him throughout the interviews. He's kind of like, come on, man, you got to give me more. And it's like, yeah, I feel the same way. I could
Yeah,
use
that's a
more
good
too.
note. Yeah, actually, that's kind of like a good little inter-commentary on the film of like, yeah, you're kind of like nothing. Yeah. Interesting.
Not to disrespect Bruce Willis, given the unfortunate news that recently came out about him. That's really sad to hear.
Yeah, that is really sad to hear. And I really do, like Bruce Willis. I think a majority of the films he like does a good job and is capable. And I think he did a fine job in this. I wouldn't say like, oh, Bruce Willis did a bad job. I think it was just kind of how the character's written, honestly. So I think it's more the character of Corbin Dallas than Bruce Willis himself. But yeah, that really does suck. He just if anybody doesn't know, he got diagnosed with early stage Alzheimer's, right?
Is Alzheimer's or
Or
dementia?
dementia. Okay, yeah, one of those. Yeah, that's really terrible. So that's really rough for him. But hopefully he can get through that as best he can. But he's had a fantastic career. I was going through Rotten Tomatoes. I was trying to pick some movies from some of the bigger actors and actresses in this movie, and his like filmography is crazy. He's been in so many movies. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know that I think it may have been last year or the year before that some other announcement came out about how like his health was in a lot of decline, and there was conversation about whether or not he was taken advantage of throughout like the last 4 years of his career, because he was in like an insane amount of movies it was whenever they announced he retired, they were talking about how like in his last 4 years of acting, he was in something crazy, like it was like 50 movies a year or something. And no, they may not be that crazy.
Yeah.
Go do your own research. But
a lot. Yeah.
There was conversation though about whether or not he was taken advantage of, given his how his mental health was going. But that doesn't change his performance in The Fifth Element.
No.
So sad news about him, but that's not what we're talking about now.
Yeah. So yeah, I could definitely see. I don't know how old he was at the time. Even in Die Hard, I think it's maybe the hairline. He's always had that like that deep hairline that makes him maybe look older than he actually is. So yeah, I could definitely see that. But I think they probably were going for kind of the action star power anyways. I mean, Pulp Fiction had come out 96, I think. So, I mean, he was still a hot commodity at the time. So I understand. And like I said, I personally don't think it was necessarily him. I think it's just like the character of Dallas is just not written to have anything like special going on, I think.
Maybe he's kind of meant to be more like not the everyday person, considering he's the one shooting these people, but I honestly feel like Chris Tucker is like, if we were in that situation, he's the one saying what we all would be saying. So I'm not to say that Corbin Dallas is like the everyday person, but I think whenever he reacts to like everything else around him, like being on Ruby's show or being, asked to like save the world by the government, he's kind of like just he's very reluctant in doing anything.
Yeah, I agree. There was one more thing I wanted to talk about before we kind of get into our final scores and stuff. This is something that always stuck out, another element that stuck out to me when I watched it when I was younger, and in a kind of disturbing way. It doesn't disturb me now, but it is weird and particular for this movie, just another thing. But it's the kind of opera scene and the whole like opera singer and the cruise scene, I guess, in general, but that like the opera scene, it always like kind of freaked me out as a kid. How do you feel about that scene?
Well, I grew up being a huge fan of like opera in general.
Okay.
So I know like my sister was asking my aunt to take her to Cheetah Girls concerts, and I wanted to go to the opera when we were kids. So I was weird like that, I guess. So personally, I liked it, even whenever it did get like to be a little more like techno or modern or whatever, and she kind of starts. I like the juxtaposition of like her singing with Lulu fighting. I thought that was like, I thought that was a really cool way of doing that. I can understand why it would be weird, especially given that like she's got all these like tube like things coming out of her, and her design, it's just also very stark from like everything else except for the Mangalores. And that's basically like, it's her and the Mangalores, I feel like, are some of the only like aliens that we see in this movie. But I don't know. I really liked it. But that's also just because opera has been something that I've always really enjoyed, and I liked the remix part of it too, just because I always like not following the rules whenever it comes to a lot of things like that, especially in movies. So I thought it was cool.
Yeah, that's a good point about the alien aspect too, about that this is a sci-fi movie and they have a lot of wacky things going on, but the blue woman, and then and I guess the big ones at the beginning, the kind of like hulking, I forgot what they're called. There's not a lot of alien designs, and anytime they do it super weird in a very particular style. I think too, with this opera scene, maybe one of the reasons why too is her introduction. She's walking through the hall, and her whole like squad that's with her have these like black mask on. It's very ominous looking, and they got this like weird entourage. And then she kind of comes out and does this like haunting singing. And then later he's like digging through her guts, and she's got like rocks hidden inside her. I don't know, something about all those elements just like really like disturbed me.
So him reaching into her open wound and pulling, that's the body horror, like in this movie, that's the only body horror you really get. It's still like, it just gets in my craw. I'm like, ew, no. But do you know what other movie you've seen her in? The singer?
I do not. Ooh, drop some trivia on me.
She was in High Tension.
Really? Who? Who is she?
She was Alex, the girl that gets kidnapped.
Really? That's
I was all over
wild.
IMDb today, and I was like, I want to know who this opera singer is to maybe see if I've been be heard her sing in other movies. And then I saw she was in High Tension, which I don't know if you know. I hated that movie so much.
I don't like that movie either, honestly.
But I thought it was cool. I was like, oh, I've seen her in something else.
That is wild. That is like one of the few French extremity films I don't really care for. They're generally hard to watch anyways, but that one I feel like had less kind of purpose than a lot of the other ones do. Yeah. That's interesting.
We don't have to get into it. I like the way that it like, whenever we listen to y'all's review on it, I really like the way that you talked about it. That's just like an offshoot of that. But New French Extremity is not for me either. I haven't really liked any of the ones that I've watched.
Oh yeah, they're tough.
I'm glad
they're
I watched
intense.
them, but I haven't liked them.
Yeah, they're intense. But yeah, High Tension, which is weird because I feel like High Tension is always the one that's kind of referenced and the one I feel like most people have seen, but I think it's my least favorite one. But that's cool though. I'm gonna go back and look at that and see. That's wild. Of course, you would never recognize her because she's fucking blue, but that's cool.
Yeah, she's got prosthetics on or whatever. And
yeah.
Hopefully that is right. It was on IMDb. I made sure. But yeah, I was like, that's kind of crazy that she
wild.
Also happens to be in this like extremely horrific film.
Cool. Nice bit of trivia there. All right. So I think before we kind of give our ratings and like final reviews, is there any other thing you'd like to hit on? Any kind of like major plot point or anything?
Not really. I think we talked about really all like the only other thing, which is just like a tiny little comedy notice. I like Corbin's mom being sprinkled in throughout, how she's just constantly whining at him and expecting him to like, give her all these things and stuff. I love when she talks to the president. She's like, "You're not the president. He's a fucking idiot," and all this other stuff. That's really it. Shout out to Corbin's mom.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a nice little element that they like it was like just like little bits throughout the movie, but it was like consistent. And I guess real quick, just the ending is I think some of the elements of this movie too are really just this movie's so particular, and yet at times it's also kind of basic in some ways. Like the ending, it's like, oh, wait, like it's weird to have this like mystical element in this and this kind of sci-fi movie, which is just another thing of like this thing is packed full of flavors, but just that, like this mystical moment of like fire for fire, wind for wind, earth for earth. It's like, what is this, a sci-fi movie? And then like the love, and then they just kind of like banging it out in the tube later on. It's like, yeah, that's kind of one of the like kind of basic. It works for this movie, but it's also kind of one of those things where you're like, yeah, sometimes this movie is, as much as it's got going on, is a little basic.
They were making out for their lives on that altar. That was like, that kind of took me out of the climax at first. I was like a peck is fine. Y'all are kissing. Don't make out.
Yeah.
And then them in the tube. That was funny. Even like as a kid, because kind of like, like as a kid, that like you're there. He saw something he wasn't supposed to see because he turns around and he's like on the tube and he's like, they're not ready.
Yeah.
I hated that they ended on a freeze frame. I really did not like how like it shows them like looking at each other and then it stops and then you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I agree. I
like that ending song though.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, me too. And I think that's a good summary of this movie. It's like there's some elements that work really well, but they're often paired with moments that don't really work as well sometimes, So I think that happens pretty consistently. A lot of the times for me, the positives like outshine those weird kind of plain moments, but they are there and pretty consistent through a lot. So yeah, that's a good point, the freeze frame and then a baller song. I agree. Okay, so let's go ahead and give our final reviews and thoughts. Out of 5, Logan, what are you going to give The Fifth Element?
So as I was watching it I watched it twice this weekend just to kind of really make sure that I had all my thoughts kind of together. I tried really hard to like take my nostalgia away, out of this next viewing, because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't just giving it, a score based on how I've grown up loving this movie. I've always had it in a positive light, and I was able to find things that I could be critical of, but it's still, I guess, at the end of the day, didn't really take away from the charm that this movie had. So I think that I am going to come in at a 4 for this one, personally. I think the comedy aspects for me are great, and I think it's well known that I do love a good love story. So I try not to raise my scores based on, it having certain tropes versus not having them. But I think this one is done really, really well. So yeah, 4 for me.
Nice. Cool. So I try to look at it through, it's like kind of curiosity lens, honestly, of like kind of picking apart. Like I don't really hear a lot of negative things about this film. And like I said before, it seems like pretty accessible. And I was trying to like hone in on like why, like what's going on with this film. It's so wacky. It's so unique in a lot of aspects. And I'm really glad that this movie exists because it's very unique. I feel like this guy just totally nailed what he wanted. And I'm really happy for that because it shows a lot of risk. It shows just like a lot of creativity, but at the same time, there are some, there are some elements that are very like plain. And to be honest, when I was kind of like picking apart the themes of this, like, let's talk about this on the show and some of these like elements and stuff, I was like, there's actually not a whole lot of depth here. There are some things to like dive into, but the whole story as a whole, like kind of sits on the surface for me in a lot of aspects. And I feel like each very unique moment and each very unique choice also kind of has this pairing of this kind of like questionable or very plain choice, as you were kind of pointing out, even with that ending there. But overall, I still really enjoyed my watch because it does have so many things that people tend to kind of enjoy, especially when they're done well, like action and comedy, little bit of horror. Like you said, there's some body horror going on. And then just things that like are just really wild and weird that make you curious. Like, oh, everybody gives like a pretty solid performance. So I enjoy this movie. I think I'm going to give it a 3.5, but I'm going to stick with my code and give it half star for the Yabos. So I'm
Gotta.
also going to end it at a 4. So that's a 4 average.
Easy math.
Yeah, easy, quick math there. So positive though. Both of us like super positive on this film. Let's see how everybody else reflects that. Let's hop into our Rotten Tomatoes and see if the critics and oozers reflect our opinions as well. Certified. All right, Logan, we have to do a little spin-off of this. We do play this game on the Straight Chilling podcast, but when there's only 2 of us, you just pretty much have to beat the house, Logan, is what you got to do. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and if you get 2, at least 2, then you are the winner. I hope you have your winning chant ready, just in case. I'm not saying you're gonna win. But
I've been preparing for this moment.
Nice. Okay, so
not by cheating, of course.
no, just getting ready, preparing, mentally getting ready. So, okay, the first one, which one is higher from Bruce Willis? Fifth Element or Die Hard 2?
Oh, switching it up.
Swerve.
Let me think for a minute and remember which one is Die Hard 2.
That's the one at the airports. It's winter time. It's like the planes and stuff like that.
Yes. Okay. Yes. It's been a minute since I've seen that one. I think I'm going to go with the Fifth Element being higher.
Okay. And this is just to clarify too. This is for the critic ratings. The critics. Okay. Cool. Yep.
Cool.
Okay. So you said you think the Fifth Element is higher. Okay. Number deuce. Which one is higher? The Fifth Element or Dazed and Confused, which is early 90s film that Mila Jovovich was in. Have you ever seen Dazed and Confused?
Oh, okay. It has been many years since I've seen it.
Uh-huh.
I do remember really liking it, and I do remember Matthew McConaughey in it, fellow Texan. So this one's tough. I think I'm gonna go with Dazed and Confused though.
Is higher.
I think so. Yes, sorry, is higher.
Okay.
I think that's blocking it in.
Okay, cool. And finally, number 3, which one is higher rated on the critic scores? The Fifth Element or Rush Hour? Chris Tucker.
Ooh, yes. I like the original.
Yeah, the first one. Yep, the original.
Okay. I think that I would have to say, dang, that one's actually kind of hard.
Yeah.
I think I'll go with Rush Hour.
I think Rush Hour is higher.
That's kind of I think Rush Hour is higher.
Okay. All right. So let's just go down, and I'm going to start with the Fifth Element. So overall, the Fifth Element, based on 68 critic reviews, has an overall 71%. So it is not certified fresh, but it is fresh.
That's kind of surprising that it doesn't have that many critics, given how big of a movie it is.
I know, I agree. And I don't really know. I mean, does it come out in 97? I don't really know how I can look at some of these reviews, like when they actually came out. 2011, 2017, 18, 14, 8, 6, 22, 21, 20. So all later. So I don't know.
Pretty recent, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. but there were still some that like from '06 and '08. So I don't know. That's weird. But the critic consensus is visually inventive and gleefully over the top. Luc Besson's The Fifth Element is a fantastic piece of pop sci-fi that never takes itself too seriously. I like that kind of like pop sci-fi. It does have that kind of like
Yeah.
pop element of something. Yeah, I like that little description. Okay, so Fifth Element is
Shout out to the costuming, by the way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Sorry.
all the outfits in this are pretty like unique and like help create this world and stuff. Even like the design, like his apartment and like how it functions and crazy shit. Yeah, it's a good like set design.
Autolush.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. Okay, so number one, The Fifth Element is 71%. You said that you thought The Fifth Element was higher than Die Hard Deuce. You are correct. Die Hard Deuce, 70%. I specifically picked one that was like,
oh, so close.
Yeah. So you were right on that one. Ding-a-ling. Number two, Dazed and Confused. So Fifth Element, 71%. Dazed and Confused, you said you thought was higher. You were correct. 98% on Dazed and Confused.
Damn.
People love the shit out of some Dazed and Confused. Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah. So you already won, but let's wrap it up and see if you got a sweep. Number three, Fifth Element, 71%. Rush Hour. You said that you thought Rush Hour was higher. And you were wrong on that one. That one was 61%. So almost got that sweep though, but you did get the win. Do you have your victory chant ready?
Yeah. Give me a yeehaw. Yes.
Nice.
Life goal fulfilled.
Yeah, congratulations. Let's get into the next segment, which is going to be hunting. We're going cooter hunting. All right, Logan. So unfortunately, the seal has already been broken because I heard recently on one of the Ghoulish Universities, you guys did a little cooter hunting.
Just a little bit. Just a little bit.
So I will try to pretend like that didn't happen. So, Logan, your first time cooter hunting here on Creature Covers. So, cooter is a character type, and the 5 points of cooterdom: sexual deviance, manipulation, smug arrogance, overall look and attire, and overall patheticness. Logan, do you think that there is a cooter in the Fifth Element?
Yeah, so I have a couple candidates that I thought of.
Okay.
But I think the one that I really want to go with is Zorg. Because I think he's definitely got smug arrogance. Whenever he's like, I don't like being disappointed. And that smug arrogance even like it almost gets him killed because he's over here being smug with the priest, and then he starts choking on that chair.
Oh yeah.
And then all of a sudden he's being pathetic and begging the priest that he was just threatening for help.
Good call.
And
yeah,
I love how the priest,
that scene.
The priest really kind of like, of course, as a priest, he's like, I'm not going to let this man die, but he really like rubs salt in the wound before he helps him out. So that's like smug arrogance and patheticness. I would argue attire because he's got that goofy shit on his head. Whatever that thing is.
Yeah, and like he starts like kind of bleeding or something one time. That was a wild scene. I meant to bring that up in like a kind of a horror aspect. Yeah. But yeah, that was weird. That was super weird.
And that was one that like a little sneaky horror, kind of deal that as a kid I was watching that and I was like, what is going on with him? Like, is he oily? Like, I guess is he a droid? Like,
I don't know. Yeah, they never explain it. Yeah.
But I guess we don't need an explanation. And I guess I would give him manipulation because like he gives the Mangalores that, those guns. And then he's like, well, they didn't ask about the red button, but like he easily could have told them about it.
Good call. Yeah.
obviously he doesn't have sexual deviance because like even whenever he is like put in a room with Lilu, like he just tries to kill her. He doesn't care about, you know, any of that other stuff. He just wants to get his job done. So he at least gets 4 out of 5 in my book.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, he's never really sexual. I was trying to think if anything was going on like in his office or anything behind the scenes, but I don't think so. But yeah, it's weird because I think almost everybody in some capacity could like get some kind of like look at attire because this movie's so wacky. And even in the realm of the world that they're living in, I feel like in some cases they still have some crazy looking attire going on. So yeah, definitely manipulation, definitely smug arrogance, and good call. I wouldn't have clocked the patheticness because I forgot like about that scene, but that's spot on with him. Like, yeah, mean, try badass, and then like something simple, just like taking him down, but he has to be saved. But yeah, good call. Good call. Possibly, I'm not sure, but maybe Ruby Rod. Let's talk about the possibility.
He was my second candidate.
Yeah, so let's talk about the possibility that, I mean, it's consensual, but he might be a bit of a sexual deviant.
I would agree. And especially like during that one sex scene on the airplane where like he's talking to that girl, she's like asking him something like, "Am I really the only one for you?" And he's like, "Yeah." And like because he's lying to her, and you know, obviously, and also I would even argue sexual deviance because he sees the Emperor's daughter and he's like, you know, "I want to be a singer. She confessed me." And he's like, and here's her voice. And he plays the sound of her moaning on the radio. Or at least he was implying that she was moaning. And it's kind of like, oh, dude, that's private.
Yeah.
So I would give him sexual deviance.
That's some kind of manipulation too, with like the talking the girls like into sex as well. So yeah, I think that gets him like double points on some of those. He doesn't have. Well, he does have some smug arrogance. He definitely has some smug arrogance because he's like thinks he's like the hot shit, you know, DJ, talk show host. Even when he's like, you know, he's like telling people like get away. Yeah.
He's more of a diva than the diva opera singer because everyone keeps referring to her as a diva, but really she's not really a diva at all. He's the diva, you know, because he does and like whenever he stops the recording the first time in the airport and he looks at Corbin, he does that, you know, saying it's so funny. And he's like yelling at this, you know, just like random dude that he threw onto a broadcast. So no, I would definitely give him smug arrogance. I also, hang on, let me see. I said smug arrogance through the roof. And I honestly didn't think that he had manipulation, but you're right though about like the way that he talks to those girls. I don't think I would give him a tire though, because I think his outfits are cool. So I don't know if I mean, I guess the thing though is like, I don't know, because he does wear, as you said, like everybody has like wild outfits. So like you could almost give everybody a tire, but I love that rose collar he has when they're at the opera. I think that's awesome.
I did too. I love like his outfits, and I love how he just like completely owns it, and now it's like very sexy to like everyone around him. He definitely has the patheticness though, because I love like Chris Tucker's scream. It's fucking priceless. That shit kills me. He's like, he kills it.
When he's like crying while he's counting to 10, he's like 1, 2, and he's like 1. I would agree that he was, like I said, he was being pathetic, but like I said, I think that if you or me were to be thrown into that situation, we would act the exact same way.
Oh yeah, absolutely. He just like kills, he like sells it so well because he's like so over the top with it. So I think somebody could, you know, if we were saying like, oh, there's so many wacky clothes in here, if he did hit a little bit on look and attire, he probably would beat out Zorg on this one, because Zorg does not have any sexual deviance, and Chris Tucker might hit almost on all 5, at least like maybe a little bit. So I don't know, maybe Ruby Rod is more of the cooter in this movie.
There's such thing as a good guy cooter.
Oh
Like he's a
yeah,
good guy, but he's a real
absolutely.
cooter.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and well, also too, you
I,
could have like the Cooter redemption arc where he helps them kind of save the world in the end. He's looking out for himself, of course, because he would die, but he does help save the world in the end. So yeah,
at least he tries. Whenever he was like, I have no fire, and he's like, Father, you smoke.
yeah. I love when he's like, why am I gotta get the broken one? Whatever. This time on the run. I love it. Every line he delivers is fucking gold, honestly. He's so good. Yeah, I
Hon-
think about
mhm.
his broken. Why I gotta get the broken one? uh
Honestly, yeah. I mean, I think if our cooter of the week is Ruby Rod, then so be it. But
yeah,
honestly, I still think he's the star of the show. So I mean, he is the. If he's gonna be a cooter, he's got to be the cooter of the week.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. God, he's got so many good lines. I was just looking at some of my there was one more where he's like he sees the bomb and he's like, what are these numbers? The bomb's just like counting down.
And I do like when Cornelius is like, it's a, and he's like, no, 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 no.
Oh my God. Yeah. Chris Tucker kills it. All right. Well, that was The Fifth Element. That was a lot of fun to talk about. This is a wild movie, good movie. And it was fun to chat about it. Logan, please, one more time, please, could you tell everyone where they can find you and all of your spooky doings?
Yeah. So once again, Ghoulish University, at least for the moment, maybe by the time this comes out, I'll have us everywhere. But at least right now we're on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can also find us on Instagram at Ghoulish Uni. You can find us on Twitter at Ghoulish University. And I forgot to mention this, if you would like to email us, we are also ghoulishuniversity@gmail.com. So yeah, that's where you can find us and all of our spooky doings, our tales from the crypts. And it was so much fun to hang out with Daddy Crypt Keeper here at the Straight Chillin' crew. I know y'all snagged him from us, but whatever.
Yeah,
So
yeah. He features a couple times in our bumps, courtesy of our old host Cesar. He killed that. Well, for legal purposes, no, nope, that is not.
yeah.
For legal purposes, that is
Just to
somebody
clarify.
else. Yeah. But yeah, thank you, Logan, for joining me this evening. It was a really great discussion. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Make sure you can check out all of our other spooky doings right here on YouTube. We have our normal creature comforts episodes where we explore all the fringes of horror and horror adjacent. We also have our normal podcast. We have lots of other content as well, some top 5 lists, video game reviews, and stuff like that. So please like, subscribe, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And until next time, don't forget to keep chilling.